let's just say hypothetically, you know a beautiful young woman who's a very talented illustrator. She does drawings with a pencil and paper. She posts them on Instagram. She gets hearts, she gets likes, she gets DMs, she gets comments of people telling her that she's so talented, she's so wonderful, she should pursue her dream. And you are in the position of saying to this young woman, you are so talented, you are so wonderful. I love your drawings, I love your sketches. Don't quit your job and move to New York City. There is absolutely no way you can afford to pay the rent on an apartment in New York by monetizing your drawings. In the 1960s, it was much easier to earn a living as an artist. It was much easier to earn a living as an illustrator, especially if you measure the money generated relative to the cost of an apartment on Manhattan Island. Heard an interview with a movie actor, and he was talking about the early 1970s in New York and exactly how much money he would make from just doing about 2 weeks of work as a live stage actor, and how that would cover his rent for more than 1 month. And he had an apartment on Madison Avenue, blah, blah, blah. He provided all the details. This apartment had a kitchen, it had a view of Madison Avenue in the 1970s. If he got just a couple of weekends of amateur off-Broadway work as an actor, he could pay for that. The glory days of the comic book industry, right? Fundamentally, the illustrators working in comic books were guys that were pursuing all kinds of different dreams. But they were guys who could afford rent in Manhattan if they just got a few gigs doing illustrations for advertisements. Just a few gigs doing illustrations for magazines. Maybe a cartoon, political satire cartoon. Maybe a few pages for Marvel and DC Comics, right? The opportunity to earn money as an artist, okay, was much greater, especially in New York City in the 1960s, right? But the barriers to having people discover and appreciate your art were much higher, much harder to overcome. Just to have your art hang on the wall and be seen by 200 people in a gallery, that was not easily done in the 1960s. Artists used to follow the careers of newspaper critics and then change their style, change the style of art they were painting, drawing, producing, change their style to try to hook one of the critics, to try to get mentioned in a newspaper column on modern art. That was the way to get ahead in the 1960s. And it was hard. And there were very few newspaper critics who mattered. There were very few newspaper columns that could create an opportunity for you. And they were all fighting for the same thing. Okay? So, when abstract expressionism became the way to get ahead, a whole lot of artists tore up their sketchbooks and threw their pencils in the garbage and tried to be the next Jackson Pollock. They knew what the opportunity was, and they knew exactly whose attention they had to capture and exactly what art show they had to get into, and that was it. Within a decade, they would have so few opportunities even to be seen. All right? And yet, in the 1960s, for a young man or young woman to quit their job and try to earn a living as an artist or an illustrator in New York City was such a different proposition from what it is today. Now, most of you don't know this about me, but my plan never was to earn a living by chasing my dream. Never. And there was a very touching moment between myself and my mother This is just in the last couple of years. She and I, we only see each other a few times per decade. And, she knows that when I finished my degree in political science, my plan was to become a paramedic. Ooh, long story short, initially I wanted to become a pharmacist. And my mother absolutely vetoed that, absolutely prevented it. She wouldn't let me do it. She would not let me become a pharmacist. It was a series of, it's not like you become a pharmacist overnight. You have to get this credential and this credential. It's a series of steps. I said, okay, if my family is against this, if my family is going to stop me from being a pharmacist, I will become a paramedic. And it was specifically, I wanted to become an emergency medical technician. So this is not a nurse. This is someone who fundamentally works in an ambulance and other emergency short-term situations like that. Take injured people, bundle them up, get them to the hospital. An emergency medical technician is the specific kind of paramedic. And I did all the paperwork. I filled out the forms. And, my parents vetoed that too. There were a number of other jobs I applied for, and I was trying to get some short-term, some long-term careers. And none of those jobs are supposed to define my identity or my character. Like, in that sense, not supposed to be my career in life. Every single one of those jobs is part of a consciously articulated strategy where it was like, look, this is the kind of research I want to do. This is the kind of author I want to be. This is the kind of writing I want to do. Or this is the kind of filmmaker I want to do. This is the kind of researcher and creative person and political activist I want to do. But I already know, I already understand that is never going to be how I earn my money. So I have to have a reliable income as a pharmacist, as a paramedic, some other job like that. It's totally unrelated to who I feel I am as an intellectual, as an author, as a creative artist. So that was my view of the world in the year 1999, the year 2000, the year 2001. And as I say, there was this really touching moment when I was talking to my mother just in the last couple of years where, I joked with her. I said, yeah, Gail, here I am in a position to say, I could have been a pharmacist. I could have been a paramedic if you hadn't screwed it up for me. And I said, and I could see right away, I could see the emotional reaction. She knows, she knew, and she'd carried an awareness of that for decades. This is something she had carried with her for decades, and we'd never talked about it. I think I've yelled at her about it, but we've never talked. Anyway, I said to her, yeah, Gail, my plan was to be a paramedic. My plan before that was to be a pharmacist, but, it's because of you that I didn't get to do that with my life. And instead, and I said to her, it's a good thing too, because if you'd let me, get those credentials or go into those lines of work, I'd be saying to you, Gail, how could you do this? How can you let me waste my life working as a paramedic or working as a pharmacist? When I should have devoted myself entirely to, the life of the mind. Exactly the kind of struggle I've been in for all these years. I said, it's a good thing too. Because instead of complaining that I didn't get to be a pharmacist, I've been complaining, how could you let this happen? How could you let me waste my talents as a pharmacist? She was really moved. It was a big moment for her, I can't say it was such a big moment for me, because for me the turning point came many years before. I understood this already in the year 2000, thereabouts. Most people were just figuring it out. It is one thing to recognize, hey, you're talented. You're talented as an artist. You're talented as an illustrator. You're talented as a musician, as a singer, as a songwriter. And it is another thing to say, that you can now or ever will be able to earn your rent through this. Okay? You can be a truly gifted songwriter. You can have a great career in which you make songs that are primarily distributed over the internet, and you perform live and whatever. You sell other physical media. You sell t-shirts. You could have a career that's very meaningful to thousands of people. You write songs that really matter, that really mean something to a few thousand people. Okay? But you still need that job as a paramedic, as a pharmacist, whatever it may be. That never is the way you pay your rent. Especially not in New York City.